Welcome everyone to our WTS Philadelphia and WTS Central Pennsylvania panel discussion related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. My name is Erica Antoine. I am the president of our WTS Philadelphia chapter. And I just wanted to take a brief moment to thank each of our chapter sponsors. For WTS Philadelphia at the platinum level, we have AECOM, Burns, GPI, HGR, Jacobs, STV, Traffic Planning and Design, and Urban Engineers. At the Trailblazer level, CNS Companies, Conrail, Gilmore and Associates, HNTB, JMT, Michael Baker International, and Pannoni. At the champion level, Envision Consultants, Sawinski Sullivan Architecture and Engineering, Stokes Creative Group, Taylor Wiseman Taylor. At the advocate level, Aero Aggregates, Aurora, Benesh, Bergman, Global Program Partners, Kimley Horn, KMJ Consulting, Langen, McMahon, Remington and Bernick Engineers, Stantec, and Trans Systems. Our DBE sponsors include Arrow Land Solutions, Bree and Associates, Dovetail Cultural Resource Group, Drive Engineering, Hunt Engineering Company, JBC, Malik and Shear, NTM Engineering, Prometech, Rabinski, and Susquehanna Civil. Our agency partners are Amtrak, the Delaware River Joint Toll Bridge Commission, the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, the City of Philadelphia Office of Transportation, Infrastructure, and Sustainability, Philadelphia Port, PHL and PNE Airports, and SEPTA. At our Central Philadelphia chapter, platinum sponsors include Gannett Fleming, JMT, Michael Baker, NTM Engineering, Susquehanna Civil, and Traffic Planning and Design. Silver sponsors are Aero Land Solutions, HDR, and SAI Consulting Engineers. And our copper sponsors include 80 Marble, CC Johnson, CCJM, Greenman Pearson, KCI Technologies, Larson Design Group, Mackin Engineering, Stantec Consulting Services, and WBCM. I'm now going to turn the floor over to Shiny Matthews. She is our WTS Philadelphia Chapter Director of DEI.
Thanks, Erica. I want to thank everybody for attending the event. You're here for bringing equity and inclusion into the public engagement process. So definitely an opportunity for us to talk about how we're moving and proceeding in our public engagement processes, and how we're making sure that we're being inclusive and we are making it equitable to others, to all, in fact. So just some quick instructions and kind of housekeeping. We're going to open up the panel discussion after this, and if you have questions, we're just asking you to put them in the chat box. If you have it for any specific panelist, if you can just say @ and the panelist's name, because we do have 5 panelists today. And then if you're not already muted, please mute yourself. And then finally, just a reminder that this is being recorded and that the link will be shared with everybody after. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Joanna Regal. Thank you.
Thanks, Shiny. Thanks, Erica. Welcome to everyone joining us today. We're really happy that you could be with us for this hour. We're going to take just a few minutes to introduce our remarkable speakers, and we're going to let them introduce themselves to you. So we're going to start out with Monica Tibbits-Nutt. Monica?
Thank you, Joanna. My name is Monica Tibbits-Nutt. I am the Executive Director of the 128 Business Council, working predominantly in Metro Boston and Massachusetts. Really focused a lot on transportation planning, transit equity, and better transit options for the communities, really merging together transportation, economic development, and housing, which has put us right in the middle of trying to improve community engagement. In my role as a board member of our Department of Transportation, I created the first customer experience department for our local transit agency, Prior to that, 7,000 person entity that had no department with customer in the title. So this is something I've been working on pretty strongly here in Massachusetts for the last 6 years. Incredibly excited to be a part of today.
Thank you so much, Monica. We're really looking forward to hearing from you. Next, Marisa Denker.
Hi, my name is Marisa Denker, and I'm the founder and CEO of Connect the Dots. Connect the Dots is a firm that focuses solely on community and stakeholder engagement. We're based in the Mid-Atlantic area, and we have a sister branch in Ireland, actually. And our sole focus is really making sure that we're designing and delivering equitable and inclusive engagement processes, particularly around like transportation projects, economic development, and traditional planning as well. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Marisa. Next, we'll hear from Patty Codina.
Yes, hello everyone. I'm Patty Codina. I am Community Development Director at Impact Services here in Philadelphia. We work mainly in the Kensington neighborhood. I came about community engagement in a kind of roundabout way. My background is in architecture and community planning. I started my career doing affordable housing development in Washington, D.C., organizing tenants to help them exercise their first right of purchase, really trying to preserve long-term affordable housing in DC's rapidly gentrifying neighborhoods. Since I moved to Philadelphia, I've worked mostly in Kensington around creating a neighborhood plan for Kensington, and more recently designing and developing the engagement processes for our rebuild projects, which are, you know, the biggest investments in parks and rec centers that the city of Philadelphia has done in the past 30 years. So that's my background.
Great. We're really looking forward to hearing your perspective. Thank you. Next, we have Nexa Castro.
Hey, welcome everybody. I'm Nexa Castro. I'm a Senior Project Manager for PennDOT for the South Central PA. That will be District 8. I've been with the department for 22 years. I also am the founder of Trust for Advancing Women in Transportation for the district. Also the diversity chair for the WTS South Central Pennsylvania chapter. And my perspective is more into from the NEPA process and how we go around the communities and engage the different aspects of the community in a bigger or small project.
Great. Looking forward to it, Nexa. And finally, last but not least, we have Victoria Adams Phipps. Victoria?
Thanks so much, Joanna. Hi, everyone. Victoria Adams Phipps. I'm the Vice President of Engagement and Impact at Fourth Economy. We are a national strategy firm that focuses on the space of community and economic development. We focus on fostering action to create great communities, impactful organizations, and strong economies. We're headquartered in Pittsburgh, but our team is geographically distributed. I actually am based in New Orleans, where today is not just Tuesday, it is Mardi Gras. So happy Mardi Gras, everybody. Prior to joining the team at Fourth Economy, I built my career in economic development and nonprofit leadership for over a decade, most recently serving as the Chief Strategy Officer for the New Orleans Business Alliance, which is the city's economic development agency. In that capacity, I led strategies ranging from industry attraction and retention, entrepreneurial growth, workforce development, and disaster resilience, but did all of that through the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So really excited to be here with all of you and looking forward to this afternoon's discussion.
Great. Thank you so much, Victoria, and happy Fat Tuesday to everyone. Okay, we're going to start out with Marisa. Can you tell us what are the components of a successful equitable engagement program?
Participation before. It's a really helpful tool to get people to think about how we're actually engaging communities and what we're trying to learn from them. So it makes you really think about what decision points there are in a process and to what extent the community has the power to decide or to input into those. So we like to kind of think about that across the process. There might be some times where it is more about just raising awareness and sharing information, but ideally we try to get to the point where it's more towards the end of the ladder, where it's more about sharing and shifting power to citizens, for citizens and communities to have the kind of be a decision maker alongside traditional decision makers. So I think some key things that we try to think about to do that is really meeting people where they are, making sure that we're thinking of really layered and interesting tactics to engage people and to really think outside the box to make sure it's fair and that the opportunity is very clearly easy for people to reach out, have it to participate. I'll let someone else talk, but I think those are really important about transparency, accessibility, and meeting people where they are.
Thank you, Marisa. Patty, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I would add, first of all, that I think when you're approaching an engagement process, first and foremost, you have to do your research, really understanding the community that you're going to be working in, and also understanding who is missing from the conversation, and not only who is missing, but why. Really identifying what the barriers are to truly inclusive engagement, I think, is the absolute first step before we even think about anything else. And then once you are designing your strategy, I think I echo what Marisa said, meeting people where they are is key. And it also means joining activities that are already happening. It means like being part of what's already happening in the community. If you're going to ask people to come to you, you need to be willing to come to them. That is also about building trust. That is also a key component without which you can't get true engagement. I heard this recently and I feel like I've been repeating it ever since. Engagement moves at the speed of trust. So you need to allow that time to build those relationships, to make sure people feel safe and comfortable sharing with you. I think another lesson is to be flexible. Sometimes you have to have the meeting that you have to have, not necessarily the meeting that you plan to have. So always being able to accommodate, who you have in the room with you, the time that you have, the space that you have, whether, we turn to virtual engagement, then you have to be flexible that way too. There's also a give and take that happens with engagement. So I would say always think about what you're leaving behind, whether that was an opportunity for, to make a new connection, for participants to gain a new skill, to participate in something interesting, to share a good meal with someone back pre-COVID days. So always think about what you're leaving behind that could be built upon. And then finally, I think a good engagement plan establishes a channel of communication. Where can people find out about you? How can you report back? How can people follow your process? And that leads to transparency and, building trust. Those are some things I would add.
I think one quick thing to add is, thinking outside the project cycle, how you were talking about kind of the idea of after, really thinking about the before, during, and after, and how even before project starts, can we start building trust? Can we start building relationships so that communities and building capacity so people are really prepared and ready to be part of a process, so that a process and a project isn't just parachuted down onto people, but rather co-created, and then continues afterwards.
And I think along that same line, looking at those relationships that have already been established by previous projects and kind of building on those, and so that they have some feeling of continuity and continuation. Is there would any of our other speakers like to add anything to that question?
Sure. One additional thing that I would add is, making space to consider what the barriers to entry might be. So I fully agree with Marisa. You have to think sort of beyond the bounds of the project scope and thinking about all of the opportunities to foster trust within a community. And with that, you have to sort of understand who you want to have at the table. And if we're talking about equity, increasingly that's someone who is not typically present at the table. So asking why that is, understanding if there are structural things that are within your control that can be addressed. So our firm, very frequently, we will implement stipends, recognizing that many community members are not professional meeting goers. If they work an hourly job, they might have to take time off to participate in a community planning process. Can we value their time in some way? If transportation is a challenge, or childcare might be a challenge in community, can we work with community nonprofits to create some solutions solutions to increase local participation. Thinking about those things with intention in advance, I think really serves to, one, drive greater participation and inclusion, but it also shows that you truly do want these folks at the table, and it speaks to that creation of trust.
Right. And I think Patty said it so well about trust, so I think that's a good point. Okay, Monica, how can you make engagement a process that happens with the community? And I think Victoria kind of started on that.
Yes, I mean, it's really building off of what all of you have had to say. So I will talk about the pre-community engagement process. And I think I have a background in sociology, and so I take that into a lot of my transportation planning. And the thing that I have found very important over the last 16 years, I think especially practicing here, is knowing the history. And so that's not just knowing the history of a particular project, but knowing the history of the community itself. Boston is an incredibly segregated area. We have a lot of racial strife that goes back to the Pilgrims. So there's a lot of history there. And I think without understanding the history of the neighborhoods and the communities we're working in, it makes it impossible to intelligently walk into those communities and try and have a conversation. So that's honestly where we always start when we're doing projects here. Then it's going and spending time in the community. And this is even before you start to connect with the different groups that are active and the different, organizations. This is really just spending time in the community, whether it's getting coffee at the same coffee place, where you're eating lunch, getting your hair cut. I spend a lot of time in barbershops. I like to mix it up, especially if I'm working in new communities. But these are how you start to build relationships that aren't about a very specific ask. They aren't about a very specific project. And that really is one of the first places that we can start to build that trust. And from there, it really is having these conversations like, hey, listen, we're thinking about doing some road reconfiguration. Kind of, what do you think? What have you found? Because the biggest thing is, a lot of times I think we go into these conversations with the community with the project already in our head, with exactly what we need, with an exact timeline. And that just erodes the trust almost instantaneously. And so I think if you have the pre-existing relationships, if you're giving them background and they're giving you background, and it turns into more like a client relationship where you are actually trying to help them achieve whatever their outcome is going to be, even if it's not for that particular project, that is where all of this starts. And if you look at some of the major infrastructure projects, especially in the United States, that have failed miserably, meaning they had all the funding in place, they had a great plan, but they still couldn't get it across the goal. And the big reason why is because the community was brought in as an afterthought. They were presented a product that they had no say in the design of. And then we're surprised when that community does not want that product. And so I think understanding, really almost consider your focus group the same way we do with like an iPhone. Give the communities that same level of respect, because at the end of the day, it's not just going to be great community engagement, it's going to be a lifelong partnership. And it's going to be a successful project because you actually hit the things that were needed within the community. And so I think this shift really needs to start happening. And I would say initially starting at the federal level and redoing the way we require that community engagement. That I think is probably one of the largest first steps.
That's definitely a big step, Monica. You're very ambitious. But yes, very, very, very interesting. And I think you kind of talked a little bit about reaching, identifying your audience, really being out in the community. So
exactly.
Thank you. Nexa, if you could answer that question for us too. I think yeah.
I got it. So when it comes to transportation, it's just a little more different, because when we receive these projects, that part that Monica expressed, it's done at the planning level. So this project has been planned, they have been studies. I have participated in the past where I have done the studies and I have sit down with the community. We had what we call a community advisor committee. We used to call it back in the days. I don't know how they call it now, but basically it's the stakeholders, municipal officials, and then the designers, and that's at the planning level when they're looking at the different alternatives. Once the project gets programmed, then now we go with the NEPA process. We start, and all the engineers on the audience know what I'm talking about, and we start with the purpose and need. And one of the bigger components of that process is the public involvement. And the public involvement can happen in different stages and different forms. But one thing that I can agree with Monica and all my ladies on the panel is knowing your audience, knowing that cultural background, that history. It happens when I was a younger PM, what we call a junior PM on PennDOT. And I have a small project. And I remember I was pregnant of my daughter and I was about to blow. I couldn't even close my vest. And I show up to this project with my designer. And basically I was just walking door to door, talking to the residents because there was a drainage issue and I could fix it, but we didn't have a right-of-way phase. So I was asking literally permission to do it and explaining to them. And I learned a lot from that project. The first thing I learned was of a male Amish would not talk to a female. So that was out of the question. My designer knew a little more about that culture than me, so he took it over and then he explained it to me. Another thing I learned is these Amish ladies, they're very technical. They know their stuff and they don't need a lot of instructions to do it nice. They're amazing. I will hire all of them to build everything because they're amazing. The other thing I learned was just because the person looks very educated doesn't really necessarily means they knows. So not only you need to know the background, the audience, the culture, but also the language. Even though that we all speak English, we don't have the same level of English. And we might need to water it down when we're explaining to the public what is our intentions and what is the purpose and need of that project, why we are there. Fast forward 16 years after that project, I was in this bigger project and I had a big Amish community. I knew from the start of the project, I was not gonna go and address the bishop of the Amish community myself. So before I started the project, I assigned my designer to talk to him. And once that trust was built with him, he was able to come to one of the bigger meetings and actually sit down with me and discuss the project. And I was able to understand what he needed. And I was able to supply that need for that community on that project. So knowing the audience, knowing the background culture, getting that language barrier, and it could be in English, it could be a different language too. I have done translation for people that speak Spanish. Same way, different kinds of Spanish, different dialects. You have to really choose what you're going to be saying to that people and how you're going to deliver that message. And then the last thing I would say is the place. Not everybody will come to your regular meeting. So you might have to choose maybe a municipal meeting to go and see. Like in the case of the Amish, they will always send a representative to that meeting. So if you can find that representative from the community, because they don't advertise where they are, and you go to a municipal or borough meeting, you can find a representative that will be there, and then you can start your conversation there. I think that's it. Just kind of know the surroundings of your community and your project.
Thank you, Nixa. Marisa, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I think just also from kind of like related to what Monica was saying, the idea we've been talking about a lot of like phase 0 essentially, and Monica and I've talked about this directly, but a couple ideas in that is one from like the higher level of like when RFPs are coming out. I think it could be very exciting if RFPs are more even designed with the community members that they'll be affecting. A lot of times we see RFPs where it's very prescriptive in terms of the engagement process that they want to see. And really, that doesn't match with anything that we've been talking about today in terms of enabling more equitable and more tailored engagement. I think also another way to make sure that the engagement is process happens with the community, if that's not happening, is at least in the very beginning, trying to have that flexibility and trying to co-design an engagement process even within those parameters. So we try to talk about that too, of how we can have community ambassadors, how we can have citizens planning committees and things like that to really help with that co-design process.
So taking maybe like baby steps to ultimately get to Monica's goal of affecting this at a much higher level. So thank you. Okay, Victoria, we're talking about processes, we're talking about programs, but how do you measure success and how can you make sure the typically unheard are actually part of this process?
Sure, I think it's a phenomenal question, and it goes back to something that we talked about at the top of this panel, which is understanding the community. You have to look at the history of the place, and you have to understand the components of community, looking at the demographics of an area, understanding the variety of cultures that exist within community. To Nexus' point, it's not enough to know that 20% of the population is Hispanic. What are the cultures that are represented within that bucket? Are we going to have effective representation from the Puerto Rican community, from the Honduran community, from the Mexican community? Really getting down to a granular level and understanding this is the composition of the community we want to work within. Of course, we can establish targets for what we want sort of overall participation to look like within our engagement process, but also considering the profiles that you want to have represented. So it's not enough to just say we want 15% of our participants to come from the Hispanic community, but specifically we want small business owners along this corridor who have been in business for at least 10 years to be at the table because we need their insight to inform this portion of our strategy. Getting that granular so that when you go through your engagement process, you're very clear on, did we hit it or not? Did we get the diversity of perspectives that were needed, not just in a checking the box kind of way, but in a way that actually is going to facilitate impact for that community and for your planning process. So that's one. But I also think considering participation numbers is not enough. You have to consider multiple participants. So are people participating across multiple facets and in multiple ways? Looking at the tools that are within your toolbox. So are you hosting large group meetings? Are you facilitating one-on-one conversations? Are you using digital media to facilitate polls and surveys? And when you're considering your total audience, who are those tools appropriate for? If we want to engage members of the youth community, young professionals, or even younger than that, a social media poll might be a more appropriate way of eliciting their feedback and making them feel engaged than it might be for someone who is a 65-year-old retiree. So thinking about the tools, thinking about your points of inclusion and points of profile within the community are key. And last but not least, I think it's important to think about impact beyond just the bounds of our plans, right? So we all know the impact that we're wanting to drive within an engagement process. The type of project we're trying to bring online, and community engagement is just a portion of that. But you should have some impact goals that are specific to what you want to come out of the community engagement process. How are you wanting to directly impact community? Are there business owners whose opportunities will improve as a result of your work? Are there neighborhood members who have emerged as champions who might want to be engaged in some capacity in the future within this plan or one much broader? Really thinking about impact beyond, once again, the scope of the plan and the scope of the existing engagement process, and attaching that formally to how you're measuring your own success.
Thank you, Victoria. Marisa, do you have anything you'd like to add to that, or?
I think I very much agree with everything you said, as usual. But I think another thing is thinking about the metrics for success in terms of also going back to co-designing the metrics for success. So even from the very start, working with the community to define what that looks like. So I think that could be an interesting.
Yeah, there was a good question dropped in the chat, which I think also speaks a little bit to that, Marisa. So for those who haven't seen it, there was a question about qualitative data and sort of multiple ways to ask similar but different questions. Any tips or tricks? I'd be curious to hear from the group, but certainly for Fourth Economy, we think about the multiple ways to sort of bring qualitative data to life. And that's strategy true for the qualitative and the quantitative. So visual aids are key, but we know that some folks want to talk it out and sort of really get into the meat of what we're saying. And so we try to provide multiple touch points for folks to engage with the data and to engage with our team. We personally don't have any platforms or software subscriptions that we use to do that work, but would be curious to sort of hear for the rest of the group if there are tools you're using to get at that point.
Any?
Well, in our case, like you can use different options, whether it's a public meeting or a coming to a municipal town hall. They used to do it. Now each municipality will have their own monthly meeting. You can sign up for their agenda and come there. There's a lot of people there that will go into those meetings. I found that now with the bigger projects, having a website for the project, we get comments and questions through there, and we can put more visuals so they can go and look. There is more access for the people that cannot actually come to a meeting. In the bigger projects, when we do the environmental assessments or the EIS, they get recorded public meetings and public hearings. And at the public hearing level, they can sign up for the testimonies of what they think about the project. And that gets recorded as part of the project. So there's multiple ways to do that. Sometimes we get a lot of questions when the right-of-way process is happening. The residents will have questions and we'll reach out, either the project manager or the designer. In my case, they reach out to us through the website, the project website. We get a lot of comments through there and questions. I think that's the main way that we do it, at least in PennDOT, the way that we do it. But sometimes you gotta become creative. Like for example, with the Amish community, they don't really use technology. They don't really are out there where you can find it. So you really have to go and look where they congregate, or where at least one of them has a business. Sometimes there's a person on that community that has a business, and you can go and talk to him, and that person will pass the message. So different ways to do it. How about anybody else here?
Patty, from your perspective, being from on the community side, I guess.
Yep. I actually, in terms of, I feel like this is something we struggle with constantly, qualitative data. How do you, gather it, make sense of it, and then report it out to the designers who need to understand it, to your community, to let them know that you captured what they were saying. And I think it really depends on what information you're gathering. When we've had to gather larger numbers of respondents, for example, we had a lot of success using online surveys, and they have several ways to analyze that data. The qualitative questions, especially word clouds, were actually really practical, and actually very, they really did allow us to make sense of the information we were getting, like what words were coming up about what was important for people in the rec center, for example. And then, however, I feel like the most interesting information we have gotten has been from smaller groups. For example, from children. How do you get information from children? We got a lot of, little drawing exercises that our designers were actually able to get into groups and, actually affect the design. So I think it depends on the type of information that you're gathering, how you're analyzing it. Another thing, interns are fantastic for getting through all of this stuff. They have the patience, they have the time, and and they're eager to learn. So if you have interns in your organization, this is a great job for them. Regarding actually measuring success, I want to echo something that Victoria said. It's not so much how many people you get into you are engaging with, but who are you engaging? For us, if if we get a lot of new people in the room, that's a success for us. Also, what happens after that? Like, did the architect change the design? Did the city change their timeline? You know, will the rec center, you know, will the GC phase their construction differently so that the pool can be open in time for summer? Those are, again, measures of successful engagement. People saw that their participation actually brought about a change. Also, we found that analyzing media mentions, social media mentions, is a good way to say, hey, who are we reaching? What networks are we tapping into? Either a hashtag search or even just, you know, seeing mentions, or the analytics on our Facebook page too. I feel like those are good ways to kind of get a sense of, you know, what strategy worked, right? When we got most responses of this survey when we did this, oh, then we should try that strategy again. And then going back to a little bit of how do you get the people that are unheard in the room? We had so when we were doing our neighborhood plan, one of the biggest issues facing Kensington at the time and now as well was the opioid crisis and the growing population of outdoor neighbors, of people suffering from addiction who are homeless and on the streets. So we knew we weren't going to get them into any public meeting. So we actually did a couple of focus groups. One was with teenagers through some after school programs. And we did, you know, a fun activity with them. And it was an amazing experience because we realized that these teenagers had a very sophisticated understanding of not only the problems, but the solutions that, you know, we studied in, you know, grad school and planning school. You know, they understood all about mixed use development. They understood, this was 2016, they understood about community police relations. They understood about how the drug dealer on the street is not always the bad guy. He might be your uncle or your father, or, you know, they understood all of the complexities and were able to articulate it and give you solutions that made sense to them. So focus groups, I thought, were very, very helpful. And the key to the focus group is get peers in the room so they'll be more comfortable speaking. The other focus group that was also incredibly enlightening was focus group with people in recovery. We reached out to two places, recovery homes near where we live, where we work, and got some really great perspectives on where the system was failing them. It also helped us in our neighborhood plan, realizing that that was a problem that as a community development organization, we couldn't tackle. You know, we had lofty goals of, you know, solving the opioid crisis in Kensington through our neighborhood plan. That conversation in and of itself, you know, showed us, oh, this is a goal that is unattainable and we need to approach this a little bit differently. So those were some.
Thank you, Patty. So obviously 2 years now, we've all been doing some form of virtual public involvement. Victoria, what's been the benefit and what have been the challenges? What have been the greatest benefits and challenges that we've had with these, or that you've experienced?
Yeah, I mean, it has been sort of a wild and crazy time these last couple of years. On the one hand, I think the shift towards virtual public engagement has created new opportunity for participation. So folks who may not have felt comfortable going to a community meeting, or like might not have been at a point of awareness of a community meeting, now have a new point of access. You know, they might have seen it posted on social media or on their local Nextdoor chat, or their friend simply texted them a link and says, hey, you should tune into this. So for us, we have seen a different profile of participant very frequently showing up in the space. However, there is also an inequity that exists when we talk about virtual public engagement, because the digital divide is real. And of course, it's worse in some communities versus others, but that is a reality across the nation where digital access, internet access is not equitable. And most communities have a significant percentage of residents who lack basic access to the internet at home, lack access to a laptop, a computer, or a smartphone even. So when we're depending solely on the virtual touch points, we also are ensuring that a certain percentage of local residents will be left out of the process. And so what we have found is that we sort of have to do both. You're able to do the virtual engagements, and that is great. We have leveraged a variety of softwares to try to bring the sort of in-person experience to life. And so our firm uses a lot of sort of design thinking methodology. And so we would be using lots of, Post-it notes and clustering and gathering and going through a series of sort of hands-on activities in person. We've tried to really translate a lot of that to the virtual environment, but we also make sure we make time to actually show up in those communities. And obviously the pandemic has made that difficult, but where possible, we're trying to meet the community where they're at. So if there is a sort of large public outdoor gathering space, can we have a small group meeting there? If there are existing spaces where people feel comfortable gathering, it might be Wednesday night after a prayer meeting at church. It might be a school fair that's taking place. Can we use those sort of existing points of gravity within a community to drive engagement for people that we're not going to catch online? So while there are incredible opportunities to sort of do really cool things with public engagement in the virtual space, you have to be conscious continually of who is not at the table and doing the work to ensure that in some capacity, online or offline, you're getting them there.
Thank you. We have an interesting question in our chat. And I'll open it up and whoever would like to answer. It says, there are community members and organizations that are continually contacted to represent and be part of discussions and decision-making for their community, but they reach a point where they're tapped out. How do we address and create new channels of communication? Mm-hmm. Is that anybody?
I'll piggyback on what Victoria was saying, because I feel like it segues really nicely. Yes, meeting fatigue is real. And I feel like online engagement actually allows us to reach some people that we might have not reached before, right? We always have your regulars that go to the community meetings, but sometimes an advantage of virtual engagement is it allows us to tap into these other folks that might not have been at the community meeting. And also precisely what Victoria is saying, go to where people are. Don't add another meeting on another day. They're already there. Join their community meeting, join their, spring festival, meet people where they are. It might mean that you have to have many more meetings that you were planning on having, but it will probably be, you'll reach more people. Another advantage of virtual meetings is the low cost. You don't have to pay overtime to keep the library open. You don't have to buy food. You don't have to, rent a space. So those have made it easier to schedule perhaps more meetings, during the pandemic. I've also found that virtual meetings, another advantage is that it makes interaction between participants and the staff running the meeting pretty easy. Now they have access, they know your email address, they have your phone number, they know what you look like. It's a very good, I feel like it's a more direct line of communication between your participants and the staff. On the other side of that, it's not a great forum for participation between participants. Like if you want to get a conversation going among residents, like the virtual meeting is usually not the ideal place for that. Another advantage of virtual meeting, I feel like it's very well suited to share information, to do outreach, to tell people about your project. Less suited for developing relationships, either between you and the people that you're engaging with, or like I said, between participants. If you want to create, more cohesion among residents, usually it's not going to happen solely through a virtual meeting. Therefore, I totally echo what Victoria was saying, use both, and you'll reach more people. We had some success with a mobile engagement unit. We have a big colorful truck with a huge screen and with a really good internet connection, where we will have a video on our project and then a QR code so you can access the survey online or access it right then and there. Also combining, share a postcard again with a QR code that goes straight to your survey. So you have that combination of reaching people, and then they can then access the digital on their own.
Mhm. Yeah, well, and like one of the things we touched on at the top of this was like closing the communication loop, right? So if they weren't able to come to the meeting, can you produce something that sort of shows like, here's what we talked about, and here was sort of the net result of that conversation. Here's what you can expect next. So that like there is something that people can sort of touch and feel to understand and feel connected to the work. Also want to draw attention, I think there was a really good comment in the chat from Elena regarding sort of the reality that very frequently this work is extractive, which I think your question was critically important. And also I fully agree with that perspective. I think one of the things that we do as a firm, we try as best as we can to look at the work that came before us. One of the things that I think contributes to that fatigue is the fact that some of these communities have been studied and studied and studied and studied and have spoken to so many consultants and participated in so many planning groups. And it's the same thing. They feel like a broken record. They feel as though their voice has not been heard, and people are coming to them to simply check the box and say, yes, they talk to community, right? And so one of the first thing that we do before we speak to a soul, we try to dig up as many past plans as we can. Can we gain some insight into what has already been shared? We look foolish if we're coming in not knowing how a community feels about certain things that have come before us. We look ridiculous if we don't understand that there are existing sentiments about the work that is going on or the trajectory of investments that have been made or not made in community. So it's our responsibility to come in armed with that knowledge and sort of setting the stage like, look, we are not trying to drop in with the top down, tell you how to do things in your neighborhood. You are the expert here. Here's what we know. Here's what we've heard. Here's what we think we understand. What are we getting wrong? What can you tell us? Respecting what has come before and respecting their lived experience. And ultimately, you also have to make sure they understand, and if you live true to this, that they understand how their thoughts are going to be included. And that's where the communication loop, I think, is more often key. It's one thing to have the conversation with community. It's one thing to understand what's came before you and to actually get some feedback from residents. It's another to say, hey, you told me that this thing really matters to you, and here's the segment of the plan where that shows up. And when you're able to sort of take that leap, that's what makes the difference. That's what shifts it from being something that is extractive to something that's additive, both to the lives of that individual resident, but that's also to that community as a whole.
I think we do an on and off the table workshop at the beginning of every project with clients and partners, so we can be really clear from the get-go how their feedback will be used, where their feedback can contribute, and also where it can't, so that we're not asking them questions and making them spend time telling us answers that we're not going to be able to deal with anyway. I think also something to think about in terms of that question around fatigue. It seemed like it was also about fatigue sane people being talked to. So I think there's also ideas of more developing the ambassador programs, developing citizen planning committees comes in there. We're doing that in Lancaster City. We're piloting a citizens planning committee that's around ahead of a comprehensive plan being started to actually help pick the planning consultant and all the way through the whole process to really help lead the process. And they're getting paid. Every time they come to a meeting with us, they're getting wraparound supports of like pizza, babysitting, things like that. So it's really about making it easy, like Victoria said before, reducing and taking away the barriers to participation, and then making sure that people are really valued for their time throughout it too.
Well, I'm going to say that if we probably have time for everyone to just share one quick lesson, something they haven't had an opportunity to share with this group today, something that you'd like to leave them with before we kind of wrap up with our with Carrie closing it out for us. So why don't we go the same order? Monica, can you give us a start? Is there anything you'd like to?
I mean, honestly, I feel like this has been a very talented panel and a lot has been covered. I would say the one thing that I touched on a little bit, but it's more a call to action, is, like I said, really taking a lot of these lessons learned, a lot of the really good work that you're all doing, and continue to elevate it and try to make a larger national impact, try and make a larger impact in our multiple different governing bodies, whether that's architecture, engineering, planning, or the many, many other national associations, and really push for changes in process. One of the things I'm working with the American Planning Association is changing how we're trained, changing how our certifications work. Because I think the other really big thing is a lot of these community groups are not able to have that larger conversation at the national level because they're considered grassroots organizations or community organizations. And I think really making it clear how professional these organizations are, compensating them the same way we would any other consulting group, but really taking this conversation as high up as we can. It's the only way we are going to see large scale change and how we approach a lot of this work.
Anyone else want to share another last thought?
Yeah, I was just gonna, this is Carol Smith. I was just gonna say that I think having been doing this for almost 35 years now, that at some point in time, once you're gone, there's a way to check back in, maybe with some of the community leaders, just to understand what the impact of what they've done has happened. Because a lot of times we come in, we get the information, we build, we move, we do these things, and they finally sometimes don't see the final project or product or how they fit into the final product. And so just kind of keep it, because that gives you a sense of accomplishment to say, okay, no matter how small our input, yes, it was heard, and here's the fruits of our labor. So sometimes it's just kind of checking back with them.
I think another big lesson learned during this time is how important layering tactics is and layering methods. We can't, like we said, can't just do a virtual meeting, can't just do a survey. It has to be a lot of different tactics at once. And I think tactics that both require a few minutes of someone's time to someone who only has a few minutes but wants to have a say, to some, to hours, to give people a deep option as well. So I think it's really thinking of those layered kind of asynchronous options and things that are happening throughout. And I think that really points to kind of what Monica was saying is sort of a systems change. Look at engagement. I think there's so many RFPs that come out saying we want robust, equitable engagement processes, but it's a lot of words sometimes. And I think kind of seeing that system change of action and value is really important too.
But I think there's those layers between what Monica's talking about and people you have to educate above you. What does that mean when you ask for a robust, equitable engagement program? What are you actually really asking for? What is that going to involve? What is the pre-work going to involve? What does that look like? I think so. Next, Victoria, Patty, anything you'd like to add?
I think it coming with a mindset of learning and leaving the labels and the biases out. It's very important. Sometimes we come with already the agenda. This is the project I'm gonna do, and then we'll focus on that, and then it inhibits us to look the bigger picture. So I think when you're gonna engage the community, you have to come with an open mind and then tailor that how it fits in your project and how you can help that community.
Excellent.
Yeah, I had a couple of things that continue to echo, I feel like, what everyone is saying. The first is a lesson that I learned early on as an intern, that when you're doing community engagement, understanding that you are not the expert at all, that it is your job there to actually elevate the voice of the experts who are the community. You don't understand what it's like to live there. You don't truly understand what the problems are. So understanding what your role is. And related to that is something that I learned more recently, is that you can set goals for your engagement process that do all the things that Monica was speaking about, because through an effective engagement process, what are you leaving behind? You could be leaving capacity. You might have trained ambassadors. You might have left a community advisory committee. There might be a board that continues to be involved with the rec center after you leave. If you're mindful about what it is that you're creating in the community at the beginning when you're designing your engagement process, we might not have been able to, you know, change police community relations, right? But we will have gone a step further in empowerment, though I hate to use that word because it implies that we are giving power to the people. No, it's people seizing the power that they have. It's empower and just elevating their voices and just being plugged into a system where they can have their voice heard and make a difference.
Yeah, I think I would echo all of the sentiments that everyone just shared. I mean, I think a sort of thread that ties across all of that is that this is about respect at the end of the day. It's respect for people, it's respect for place, it's respect for the culture of that place and the history and legacy of that place. It's about valuing their time and contributions and insights, respecting that lived experience, and ultimately being respectful in the way you interact with that community and communicate with that community. Keeping respect at the forefront, I think, is how you actually advance an equitable engagement strategy.
Thank you. Okay, and thank you to all of our panelists today. I know Carrie Fisher is going to be closing it out today for us, the Central PA WTS president. Carrie.
Thanks, Joanna. And thank you to all of our speakers. Today's event was great. I think everyone learned a lot and we got to share all the perspectives. It was really interesting. So I also want to thank the WTS Philadelphia Programs Committee, Communications Team, Diversity Committee members for organizing this event and inviting Central Pennsylvania to join. Virtual events have certainly made it easier to hold joint events and accommodate transportation professionals across Pennsylvania. And even internationally, as we saw from this call, which is pretty cool. Lastly, I just want to note a few upcoming events for both of our chapters. For WTS Philly, on March 29th, they will be holding a joint event with COMTO and SMPS at 8:30 in the morning. It is Philadelphia Transit Plan, a vision for 2045. Registration and invitation will be shared soon, so stay tuned for that. They are also hosting a ladies golf clinic and mini tournament on April 25th. That starts at 8:30 a.m. And their annual gala will be on April 7th at 5 p.m. at the Crystal Tea Room in Philadelphia. I believe you can visit their website to get more information or reach out if you're interested in signing up for those events. And as for Central Pennsylvania chapter, we will be holding a technical event on March 9th. One PDH will be offered. The topic is Stites Tunnel Bridge Replacement. And you can also register for that on our website or reach out to anyone on this call, myself, if you're interested. And our annual Awards and Scholarship Gala will be held on Tuesday, March 29th at the Eden Resort in Lancaster, starting at 5 p.m. And both chapters have Transportation U Clubs. If you're interested in giving back to the community, getting younger women involved in STEM-related careers, please reach out as well for that. Thank you for attending today's event. That's really all I have. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to any of us.